I thought it would be important to talk a little bit about what we mean by performance first. And I've shown this before, but I think it's good to review it. And traditionally, urban design was looked at in plan in what's traditionally called the figure ground. And we spent a lot of time interested in the actual formal spatial structure of the city in the figure ground. So you could call that the formal spatial performance. Still very important, but Collage City, Colin Rowe, and a lot of people have played games with this in terms of making cities that start to make a very rich, complicated composition of space. You've all heard the Gehl story. It's been told by many, many other people as well, but it really tries to privilege the idea that the social performance of the city should come first, that is the life, and then giving it a spatial definition, and then the buildings. We used to spend, and still spend, a lot of time on that, and you've seen evidence of that. There was quite a bit of work done on the public right-of-way, call it the public realm, if you will, in terms of all of the mobility it provides. Cars, public transportation, pedestrians, and bikes. And this was a reaction against so much of our cities that are designed almost solely for the car. So you could call this the mobility performance. Now, what's been left out of this really is the environmental performance. And last year at our conference, we had a terrific conference that really dealt with the social performance, didn't we? That is the activity of people in the public space of cities and what can activate that. So this is the performance that's brought into the city. So when we talk about environmental performance, which we just heard, it's actually how that public space works as a climate and how it works dynamically and how we can manipulate it to create comfort. So normally, you know, we can give, I want to talk a little bit about what is environmental performance. And if we look back at the discussions today, and to tweak my memory here, let me just do this. So if you look at, I'm sorry about this, if you look at Cindy's performance, there you are. She didn't talk specifically about the environmental performance of that public plaza in her last project, did she? And yet it was brilliantly designed. It blocked the northwest cold wind, provided sunlight in winter, it had canopy shade in the summer for a city that is very cold in the winter and very hot in the summer, which is what we just saw in the last discussion about Pittsburgh. So that is the way in which the shape, the formal shape of the city actually promotes an environmental performance that helps us exist in the public realm. So if we then also look at the mango swamps. Now, how many of you have even been near a mango swamp? Not very many. I have been. She has been. That environmental condition, that environmental performance inside that mango swamp would have been an amazing gift to the city. It's that quality that is really valuable as a designer. It's this design quality that we want. If we then look at the High Line that Maura talked about, what I have found to be spectacular about the High Line, I went there when it was first finished, and you could see the little seedlings struggling away. I came a little later, it had grown up a little bit. When I went back there, just recently, it's an entirely different microclimate in the city of New York. You can actually walk in this amazing natural space that has smells, that has moisture coming off of it, is shaded. It's amazing. It's that quality that really matters. And then I think the big message from the last discussion is how do we design the public space to provide changing comfort for people throughout the seasons. So that's the thing that I think you as designers want to care about. But we also have the numbers side. So here's also another reason why it's important. It's because in many cases, the public space of cities is all some people have. It's really their whole existence, and it is being threatened. You've heard it all today. The causes, the air pollution, the emissions from fossil fuels, but especially these impacts, storms, extreme heat waves, all exacerbated by the heat island effect. And the wonderful point that you make about the evening, if the city doesn't cool down, your organs don't cool down. So you have serious health threats if you have to be in a city that has 40 degrees C for 2 weeks. That's why all those people died. So that's why Brian has written that this is probably emerging as one of the most important climate-related health threats to our human health. So this is really up to us to change. So as designers, it really does touch every surface. The urban heat island is caused because we don't have evaporative cooling from the ground. In other words, we have hard, impermeable surfaces. We have high absorption rate. These are the dark surfaces. Reabsorption of solar radiation because all the light bounces down and keeps absorbing and keeps absorbing. Waste heat from the buildings, especially air conditioning, but it's cars and trucks and people. And then in many cities, what might have had a wonderful natural ventilation system, it has been changed by the urban form. So that's added to the heat island. And yet, look at the public realm. Look at all the things that it does. It changes the microclimate. It changes the air quality. It absorbs CO2. It treats the stormwater. It treats the wastewater. It creates food. It creates habitat. It can create biomass for energy. We saw that in your work in Amsterdam. Yes, very aesthetic, can be, or it could be just quite decorative and superficial. It's a very important health dimension. Obviously, we've seen recreation, all the community and social activities, and also the transport space. But these are the things that usually don't get paid a lot of attention to by urban planners. Starting to now. So what does that do? You've heard me talk about the urban section. Once you think about all those surfaces, you have to think about the roof, the facade, at its different heights, the lower facade, the sidewalk, the parking, the bike lane, the travel lanes, the public, public transit space, etc. So we can rethink all of these things, especially since a lot of the infrastructure needs repair anyway. So I went through and took multiple sections and showed all the various things you could put on here. Green facades, PVs on the roofs, different sidewalk shading, parking that's different, increased canopy, food growing, etc. And then I sat down and said, well, no, that's not good enough. I need to really show you. So you really have to think the paving so that it's reflective, it absorbs stormwater, it even has some evaporative cooling. You can even have your public transit space be green. You can have parking be green. So the ground can be dramatically different. The tree canopy, you heard Brian talk a lot about that. It can have a huge impact on mitigating the heat island effect. And trees, even though they probably cost a lot and need some maintenance, they're probably the best investment a city can make in mitigating this problem. Green facades, they're expensive, but what do? They change the albedo of the vertical surfaces. Does the sun that hits this bounce down and create greater heat on the ground below? No. The shiny facade behind is covered by green. Same here. This is, it's growing up there. So green facades can have a huge impact on the canyon, the bouncing of light, changing the mean radiant temperature. This surface is a very different temperature than the surface it would have been if the masonry behind had been in sunlight. The roofs, obviously, you can just have them for aesthetic purposes, for gardens. Food in the city can really change things. We can treat stormwater in all different kinds of bioswales, as you can see in operation here, that help the trees grow, etc. You get evaporative cooling from these surfaces. These are all the I tried to list, at least initially, all the co-benefits so that everybody says, oh, well, this costs so much. Well, we haven't really monetized how to capture those co-benefits. That's something we should be doing. That's a next step, is to show how valuable investment in this is and how much better it is than just having to dig up and put it in a bigger pipe. You can also treat wastewater. Living machines, these are parks, but they're also sewer treatment for these guys. That's in China. That's Kongjianyu. What about these? You've all seen these, right? So it's a whole new space type, but it'll give, just think about that in your imagination for what it could do in terms of changing the environmental performance of space. Rather than just making a big room, which is very nice, what could it do? We're starting to see all these new walls being made. This I showed earlier. This one. This is growing up. It's a big shading device for this glass building behind. And we saw some of this in Masdar. It's not all Masdar. These are all the Masdar sections that we're trying to produce a shading strategy for the public space. Close the top, create ventilation, evaporative cooling down below, even though it's humid there, filtered light. So, do you all know where this is? He should know. What? Berlin. It's Potsdamer. It's the Sony Plaza there. Look at this. Pretty good, huh? For daylighting and shading. So I've shown these things to try to tweak the designer's imagination to accomplish the things that I talked about at the beginning. What is it like in BOA 1 to be able to sit on the top of those steps when the air is warm and calm, but to duck down behind them and sit behind them and have the wind go up over you? Now that's a microclimate environmental performance design. What's it like to be outside when it's really windy and to go into the inner courtyard where it's calm, there isn't wind, you can get out of that, in some cases very cold wind, and be in this wonderful, peaceful space. The noise is different, the passage of air over your face and skin is different. That's what I'm talking about in terms of environmental performance. So I thought, these are all very generic. So what if I said, okay, I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up going into New York. New York has these challenges. It's very, very cold in the winter. The wind howls across the east-west streets. And in the summertime, it is unbearable. So I said, you know, I'm going to take a look at this. So most streets, this is an actual street, I picked it. So this is one of the east-west streets. Few trees. You have this wonderful section, sidewalk, up and down. You know, this is where the servants used to live, but now probably where my son would live, along with 3 of his friends, because that's the only way he could afford it. But you have this little in-between space, which is nice, but very little tree cover, no distinction between north and south, etc., right? Then you have the boulevard. You know, New York is basically one-way couples. One cross street goes this way, the other goes that way, the boulevards all do this. It's meant to move the cars. So here it is, pretty straightforward, right? So I said, I read Brian's book, and I said, what could we do about this? So first of all, going back to my pictures, you all should really think about the street entirely differently. You can make the parking this way. Let me get this to work. This way. Permeable, green, absorbs, goes into the groundwater, right? You can do the concrete sidewalk pavers. You can actually add material in the top so they're more reflective. You saw his white plaza. Doesn't necessarily have to be white. You can they're very clever now about making highly reflective surfaces that, you know, aren't glare. You probably want to have the travel lane of the cars be macadam, but you can change the surface now. Actually, you can even put PVs in there, but that doesn't help the microclimate. And obviously, we've seen lots and lots of different designs of the bioswales. So you as urban designers, I think the design of 10 blocks, just the streets, is a terrific design problem for different climates. So I said, okay, let's try greening this thing. So if we actually we put a planter swale between the sidewalk and the parking, and we planted trees regularly, and we added more trees in the borrowed space, in the section space here, look at how much coverage we could get. So we've gone from 5% to probably 40 to 50% shade on the street. Trees transpire, they give you cooling. Okay, so I borrowed one of those things from Zurich at the end here, and I built a wind barrier and a seating area at the corner. So when you try to go, you know, at the corner here, you've made barriers, so the east-west wind won't be quite as strong. That's tricky. We'd have to actually put that in a wind tunnel to test it. But you can really block that. And then I said, what if we took canopies from the Sony Plaza in Berlin and did this for 10 blocks on the boulevard and changed the shading on the boulevard at least 50%. You could do more. And just the very preliminary indications are you would get a very big reduction in the temperature in New York, especially in the extreme weather conditions where you have an extreme heat wave. So suddenly, I'm more familiar with this. You know, if it's 118 and you've knocked it down 12 degrees and it's slightly over 100, that's a lot more tolerable. And your organs aren't, you know, stressed at that level. It's likely in New York we're going to have 40 degrees, 45 degrees C. And then maybe this isn't enough. So I thought, well, let's really go radical here. We're going to take the street, We make it asymmetrical. We're going to have 3 rows of trees on the south side, 2 on the north, and we're going to put in diagonal parking. So you can see what we're putting in here, right? And then you can look at the cover here. It really gets up there, 70, maybe even 80%. As they get bigger, probably as much as 90% shading on that street. So if you have a kind of gateway at the end of each block, they're 600 feet long, what do you have? You talked about it, creating an urban oasis, block by block by block in New York. And you can also then decide, well, on the boulevards, maybe we actually build one of those things like Zurich and have, a trellis canopy at the 4th floor. And then we do vertical shading on the east-west facades and green roofs. We could get as much as a 16-degree temperature reduction. Okay? Now, so those are the numbers, right? We've made a big health impact. We've mitigated the urban heat island. We've done all those things. I'm most interested in what that feels like, what that space is really like, and how you detail each one of these things so they're places to pause and sit, how this becomes a near room in the city, and how maybe 10 blocks or 5 blocks of the boulevard changes. Maybe you even change the paving and the height of the paving, sort of kind of the stuff that you started to do in New York and Times Square. So you really change the environmental performance. So, all I wanted to do was suggest that this is an open canvas for all of you. And what you really need to do is not only balance the numbers and all of the evidence and reasoning you can bring to bear for why this is good in terms of health, urban heat island mitigation, reduction in air conditioning, but the most important thing is the quality of the space that you make. So thanks. Oh, I forgot one other thing. So where do we get the water for this? Gray water, he's got it. We should be thinking in California, we're going to try to build an eco-block where we take the wastewater and treat it locally so we can add 4 times as many trees in the public space of the block. And the only way we can do that is by using gray water, because they have no water.
Thanks for the lecture. I just wanted to say, talking a bit about trees today, with all the lawsuits and people wanting to cut down trees when they get big. I know in Lund, a lot of trees have been cut down past few years, and thinking of having a road where there's only trees. How do we meet those sort of question marks?
Well, there is a numbers game you can play. You can look up how much carbon that tree is worth. You can probably calculate how much stormwater it absorbs. You can do a whole numbers game on it. But if it's making a beautiful space in a beautiful place, that's priceless, and you probably have to protest.
I totally agree. It's just, I know lawsuits today is just hammering down as soon as any damage.
Oh, by the way, one of the things about trees, so I'm old enough to have lived through the elm disease disaster that happened on the East Coast. So a lot of the American cities on the East Coast, especially college towns, planted elm trees, these incredibly majestic, tall trees. They all got sick, and they all died at the same time. So these towns went from incredibly beautiful, magnificent places covered with shade to, by comparison, a wasteland. This is the whole species thing that Maura was questioned about, and others of you have shown interest in it. So I really think when we're thinking about the design of this green infrastructure, that there should be a phasing idea to the planting of trees. So they don't all die at once, and you let them fill in phases, and you have a whole schedule for that. And I also think if you were to educate and involve local neighborhoods, they would manage and love these things, because that's what they need. They need to be cared for. Other questions? Okay, let me say one last thing. So I think Brian's doing this. There are people in Singapore, there are people in Hong Kong, there are people in Beijing, some people at MIT, not just Georgia Tech, some people at Berkeley. So we're now getting to the point where we can really model the performance of these different strategies in great detail. You saw some of that from Brian and some from you, where you can actually project what the temperatures will be under the various seasonal conditions. We need to do that and try to prioritize what some of the best strategies are, but then we need to build them and measure it. We really do. Then we as a community can really have ownership over the effectiveness of these various strategies. And we probably need to work with the landscape architects, with urban ecologists, and so on, to really make sure we do the research well.